The night they laughed at her, she was the one who brought back the light. Between stripped wires and buried truths, the woman once called too fragile revealed the unexpected. Sometimes, the spark that ignites everything again is found in the grease. Chapter 1. On that stifling August night in Atlanta, when the air seemed suspended between the summer heat and the silence of early morning, the Anderson estate was plunged into absolute darkness. Inside the imposing Buckhead residence, among silver candelabras that trembled in the nervous hands of the staff, he dropped the line like someone tossing a lit match on gasoline. "Get a man in here for this, or we're going to spend the whole night in candlelight." The laughter was muffled, almost conspiratorial, echoing in the dining room where 20 guests from Atlanta's high society watched the scene. But that laughter didn't last long. Minutes later, as the emergency generators continued to fail uselessly, the power suddenly returned, and the door to the electrical panel creaked open, slow and deliberate. From it, she emerged, sweating, her cheeks flushed from the heat, her light brown hair pulled back in a makeshift ponytail. Her green eyes, hard as emeralds polished by adversity, met his without a hint of hesitation. Abigail Scott, 24 years old, wasn't wearing a work uniform. She had come to the mansion that morning only to check the security company's electrical system, but was urgently summoned by the housekeeper, who was desperate about the blackout threatening to ruin the most important dinner party of the Atlanta social season. She wasn't dressed like the other women who frequented that house. Her fair skin contrasted with her calloused hands, which knew hard work, and her transparent gaze reflected a dignity forged since she was a child on the historic streets of Cabbagetown, learning the trade from her grandfather, Stephen, since she was 10, fixing the world with pliers, electrical tape, and an unshakable faith that every problem has a solution. James Anderson, 32, heir to the largest hotel empire in the Southeast, still stood on his pedestal of arrogance, trying to hide his astonishment. His eyes, as blue as a Carolina sky in winter, couldn't look away from this woman who had just solved in 15 minutes what his specialized technicians hadn't managed in 2 hours. James's imposing height, his perfectly slicked-back black hair, and his distinguished bearing that betrayed years of education in private Swiss schools contrasted dramatically with Abby's natural simplicity. It was as if two completely opposite worlds had collided in the mansion's Italian marble foyer. "How did you do it?" James asked, a mix of genuine curiosity and wounded pride in his deep voice. Abby wiped her hands on an old rag she always kept on her tool belt and gave him a look that blended professionalism with a hint of defiance. The problem was in the main breaker. Someone had tampered with the wiring, creating a short circuit that tripped whenever the system demanded more power. It was a time bomb waiting for the exact right moment to go off. The technical explanation flowed from her lips with a naturalness that left James completely bewildered. He had grown up surrounded by experts in all sorts of fields, but he had never heard anyone speak with such passion and knowledge about something as mundane as electricity. The guests began to gradually disperse, some whispering comments about the electrician girl who had saved the night. Abby started gathering her tools with precise and efficient movements, completely oblivious to the curious glances that followed her. "Wait," James said, approaching her with decisive steps. "I'd like you to come back tomorrow to check the entire system in the house. I need to make sure something like this doesn't happen again." Abby looked up at him, studying his face for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. There was something in the way James looked at her that was different from the contempt she had noticed in the other guest's eyes. It was a mixture of reluctant respect and genuine curiosity. "All right, Mr. Anderson. I'll be here at 8 in the morning. But I should warn you, a full inspection will take several days. This house has a very complex system, and from what I've just seen, there are several irregularities that need immediate attention." James nodded, noticing for the first time the melodious timbre of her voice when she spoke with professional confidence, so different from the defensive tone she had used when he made his dismissive comment. The next day, Abby arrived promptly at 8, carrying a larger toolbox and a case of measuring instruments James hadn't seen before. The housekeeper, Mrs. Davis, greeted her with a maternal smile that contrasted with the coldness the other employees had shown her the previous night. "Honey, I made you some coffee and some homemade biscuits and gravy so you can have breakfast before you start," the older woman said, taking Abby's arm with genuine affection. "I heard what happened last night, and I want you to know you have a friend here." Abby felt a lump form in her throat. It had been a long time since she had received that kind of maternal treatment. Since her grandmother had passed away 3 years ago, she had been practically alone in the world, struggling to keep the small electrical repair shop she had inherited in Cabbagetown afloat. While she was having breakfast in the mansion's spacious and bright kitchen, James appeared, dressed more casually than the night before. He was wearing dark jeans and a white cotton shirt that enhanced his natural tan. His blue eyes seemed warmer in the morning light, and Abby noticed he had small expression lines around them that gave him a more human look. "Good morning," he said, addressing Abby directly and completely ignoring Mrs. Davis, who discreetly withdrew to give them privacy. "Where do you plan to start?" Abby finished her coffee and stood up, immediately adopting her professional posture. "First, I need to check the main panel and map out all the circuits in the house. Then I'm going to inspect every connection point by point. If there's more tampering like last night, I'll find it." "Tampering?" James arched an eyebrow in surprise. "Are you implying that someone deliberately sabotaged the system?" "I'm not implying anything, Mr. Anderson. I'm stating it directly. What I saw last night was not an installation error or a failure due to wear and tear. Someone altered those wires on purpose, and they did it with enough knowledge to make it look like an accident." The gravity in Abby's voice sent a shiver down James's spine. If she was right, it meant that someone with access to his house had deliberately tried to sabotage one of the most important events on his social calendar. For the next 3 hours, Abby worked with an absolute concentration that fascinated James. He found excuses to pass through the areas where she was working, observing the meticulous way she dismantled connections, checked wires, and jotted down measurements in a worn-out notebook. What impressed him most was the way she spoke to the electrical devices, as if they were living beings capable of telling her their secrets. "Let's see what you have to tell me," she would murmur while connecting a multimeter, or "Don't worry, we'll find what's hurting you," when she detected an irregularity. It was midday when Abby made the discovery that would change everything. She was inspecting the mansion's basement, an area that according to the official blueprints only contained the utility room and some storage. But as she traced a wire that didn't match the original electrical diagram, she found something that made her blood run cold. Behind a false panel in the wall, hidden with a skill that only someone with technical knowledge could have managed, was an entire system of wires that didn't appear on any blueprint. And most disturbingly, that system led directly to several audio recording devices that had been logging conversations throughout the house for months, maybe years. With her heart pounding, Abby followed the trail of wires to the central source, a small secret room behind the boiler, equipped with digital recorders, transmission equipment, and dozens of tapes marked with dates going back more than 2 years. As she examined the labels on the tapes with trembling hands, a sound alerted her. Footsteps approaching down the basement hallway. Quickly, Abby closed the false panel and pretended to be checking the normal connections of the heating system. "Everything in order down here," James's voice echoed in the basement, followed by the sound of his footsteps on the concrete stairs. Abby straightened up slowly, her mind racing to decide what to tell him. Should she tell him immediately about her discovery? What if he already knew about the surveillance system? What if it was part of some larger plan she didn't understand? "Yes. Everything's normal down here," she finally replied, hoping her voice wouldn't betray the turmoil she felt inside. "I'm just checking the connections for the boiler and the central air conditioning system." James moved closer, and for the first time since they met, Abby was intensely aware of his physical proximity. She could smell his cologne, a subtle blend of citrus and wood notes that combined with the natural scent of his skin. His blue eyes studied her with an intensity that made her feel exposed, as if he could read every thought crossing her mind. "Find any irregularities?" he asked, and Abby noticed there was something more to his question, an underlying tension that suggested he might also suspect that something wasn't right in his own home. Abby made a risky decision. "Mr. Anderson, could we speak privately when I finish the inspection? There are some technical aspects I'd like to discuss with you." James watched her for several seconds that felt like hours. "Of course. How about we talk in my study at 6, Mrs. Davis can bring us some coffee." "Perfect," Abby nodded, returning to her work with slightly trembling hands. The rest of the afternoon passed in a tense haze. Abby completed her inspection of the main system, finding 2 other irregular connections that confirmed her suspicions. Someone had been systematically spying on the Anderson family, and they had done it with a sophistication that required not only advanced technical knowledge, but also regular access to the house. When the clock struck 6, Abby headed to James's study, her heart beating so hard she feared he could hear it. The study was an impressive room, with mahogany shelves stretching from floor to ceiling, filled with books that looked like they had actually been read, not just placed for show. James was standing by the window, watching the garden bathed in the golden light of the Georgia sunset. When he heard her footsteps, he turned to her with an expression that mixed expectation and apprehension. Please, have a seat, he said, gesturing to a cognac-colored leather armchair in front of his desk. Mrs. Davis brought coffee and some pecan pralines she makes specially. Abby sat on the edge of the armchair, maintaining her upright professional posture. Mr. Anderson, what I have to tell you is very serious. Your house is being bugged. The words fell into the silence of the study like stones in a still pond, creating ripples of tension that spread throughout the room. James stood motionless for a moment, processing the information. Then he slowly walked to his chair and sat down, his expression gradually changing from surprise to something more like resignation. "Are you sure?" he finally asked, his voice deeper than usual. "Completely sure. There's an entire audio recording system installed in your house, wired into the main circuits in a way that's almost impossible to detect unless you know exactly what to look for. The devices are recording conversations in all the main areas: the dining room, the living room, your study, even your bedroom." James ran his hands through his hair, messing up his perfect hairstyle for the first time. "Do you have any idea who could be behind this?" Abby hesitated before answering. "Mr. Anderson, this type of installation requires regular access to the house over an extended period. It's not something a stranger could do. It has to be someone you trust, someone who knows your routines and has the freedom to move around the house without raising suspicion." The implication of her words hit James like a punch to the gut. His blue eyes hardened, and Abby could see the exact moment a specific suspicion took shape in his mind. "Did you find anything else? Any clue as to the identity of the person responsible?" Abby took a deep breath before continuing. "There's something else. The wires are connected to a transmission system that sends the recordings outside the house. And I found this." She held out her hand, showing a small recording device she had found hidden behind the false panel. It was a professional, expensive model, the kind used by private investigators or security agencies. James took the device with slightly trembling hands. "Is there any way to trace who this belongs to?" "Possibly. But Mr. Anderson, there's something else you should know. While I was tracing the wires, I found that the system is connected to an external power source. Whoever did this not only has access to your house, but they've also been paying to keep the system running." The implications of this were even more disturbing. This wasn't an improvised operation, but a systematic and costly espionage that had been going on for a long time. James got up from his chair and began to pace the study, his mind clearly working to process all the information. "What do you recommend we do?" "The first thing is to document everything before we dismantle the system. We need evidence of what's happening. Then we could try to trace the transmissions to see where the recordings are going." "Could you do that?" Abby's pulse quickened. What James was asking went far beyond a simple electrical repair. He was asking her to become his ally in something that could be extremely dangerous. "I can do it," she finally replied, "but I need you to understand that this could get very complicated. If we find out who's behind the spying, that person isn't going to just stand by." James stopped in front of her, and for the first time since they met, Abby saw real vulnerability in his blue eyes. "Abby," he said, using her first name for the first time, "I need to know the truth, whatever the cost." The sound of her name on James's lips sparked something unexpected in Abby's chest. It was as if an electric current had passed directly through her heart, turning on lights in places that had been dark for a long time. "All right," she nodded, "but we're going to do this right. I'll need at least a week to document everything and trace the connections without the person responsible realizing we've discovered the system. What do you need from me?" "I need you to act completely normal. Don't change any of your routines. Don't mention any of this to anyone, not even the employees you trust the most. And," Abby hesitated a moment before continuing, "I need you to give me full access to the house for the entire week. I'll have to work at irregular hours to avoid being seen." James nodded immediately. "You'll have complete access. I'll give you a key and the alarm code. Is there anything else you need?" "Just one more thing. During this week, it's very important that we don't appear to have any relationship beyond a strictly professional one. If the person who is spying suspects you know something, they could destroy evidence, or, worse, they could become dangerous." The word relationship hung in the air between them, charged with a meaning that went beyond the merely professional. They both felt the tension, but neither acknowledged it verbally. "Understood," James said, his voice slightly hoarser. "When do you want to start?" "Tonight I'll come back at 11 when everyone's asleep. Will you be here?" "Yes. And Abby," James paused, struggling with words he wasn't used to saying. "Thank you. I don't know why you're willing to do this for me, especially after what I said last night." Abby stood up, straightening her work clothes and picking up her toolbox. "Mr. Anderson, No one deserves to have their privacy violated like that. And as for last night, she stopped at the door and looked him directly in the eyes. Maybe it's time you learned that women also know how to fix the things men break. With those words, Abby left the study, leaving James alone with his thoughts and a completely new feeling in his chest. For the first time in his life, he had met a woman who wasn't impressed by his money, who didn't need his protection, and who had just shown she was capable of protecting him. As she drove back to her small apartment in Cabbagetown, Abby couldn't get the look of vulnerability she had seen in James's eyes out of her mind. She had spent her entire adult life fighting to be taken seriously in a man's world, building emotional walls to protect herself from rejection and discrimination. But something in the way James had looked at her that afternoon had made those walls tremble dangerously. Chapter 2. At 11 o'clock at night, the streets of Buckhead were submerged in a tranquility that contrasted dramatically with the emotional turbulence Abby felt as she approached the Anderson estate again. She had spent the last 4 hours in her small workshop, preparing the specialized equipment she would need to document and trace the espionage system without being detected. Her grandfather, Stephen, had taught her that every electrical problem told a story, and that patience was a good electrician's most important tool. "Kiddo," he used to say as they worked together during the hot summers in Cabbagetown, "the wires talk, but only if you know how to listen. And sometimes what they tell you can change lives." She never imagined how prophetic those words would be. The mansion looked different in the darkness, less imposing, but more mysterious. The security lights created golden pools on the perfectly manicured lawn, and Abby could see James's silhouette waiting for her by the side entrance they had agreed to use. He was wearing jeans and a dark t-shirt, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked completely human. Without the expensive suit and formal atmosphere, he was just a worried man waiting for answers in the solitude of the night. "You're right on time," he said in a low voice as she approached, carrying a backpack full of technical gear. "Punctuality is crucial in this line of work," Abby replied, whispering just as quietly. "Is everyone asleep?" "Yes. Mrs. Davis left at 10, and the rest of the staff live off the property. We're completely alone." The phrase "completely alone" created an unexpected tension between them. In the intimacy of the night, without the social barriers and class differences that separated them during the day, they both felt a connection that was impossible to ignore. James led her through the dimly lit house, lighting the way with a small flashlight. As they walked through the silent corridors, Abby was intensely aware of his presence beside her, of the soft sound of his breathing, of the occasional brush of their arms as they navigated narrow spaces. "Where do you want to start?" James asked, when they reached the basement. "First, I'm going to install some monitoring equipment on the spy system. I need to know exactly what it's recording and where the transmissions are being sent. Then we'll check all the rooms to map the full extent of the system." For the next 2 hours, they worked in a concentrated silence that gradually became comfortable. James held the flashlight, while Abby installed nearly invisible tracking devices on the connections of the spy system. Her movements were precise and confident, and James found himself admiring not only her technical competence, but also the natural grace with which she moved in small spaces and the infinite patience with which she unraveled complex problems. "Done," Abby whispered finally, carefully closing the false panel. "Now we need to check the rest of the house to see exactly which rooms are compromised." As they moved through the mansion, Abby discovered the truly disturbing extent of the espionage system. Practically every main room had hidden recording devices, installed with a sophistication that suggested professional involvement. It was in James's study that they made the most disturbing discovery. "James," Abby whispered, using his first name as she examined a particularly complex connection behind one of the bookshelves. "This microphone is wired directly to your phone. Any call you make from here is being recorded." James felt his blood run cold. "How long do you think this has been active?" "From the components I'm seeing, at least 2 years, possibly more." The magnitude of the violation of his privacy hit James like a wave. For years, every personal conversation, every business call, every intimate moment had been recorded and sent to someone lurking in the shadows. "Do you have any idea who would want to spy on you like this?" Abby asked, noticing the pallor that had washed over James's face in the dim flashlight beam. James was silent for several minutes, his mind replaying the events of the last few years. Finally he spoke, his voice laden with pain and bitterness. "My cousin Robert," he said slowly. "Robert Anderson. He's always believed our grandfather's inheritance should have been his." Abby waited patiently as James organized his thoughts, instinctively understanding that he was about to share something deeply personal. "My grandfather Joaquin founded the hotel company 50 years ago," James continued, his voice barely audible in the darkness of the study. When he died 10 years ago, he left everything to me instead of splitting the inheritance between Robert and me. Robert never accepted it. He always maintained that I wasn't the true heir, that there was some irregularity in my birth that my grandfather had hidden. And is it true? Abby asked gently. James looked her in the eyes, and in the faint light of the flashlight, she could see decades of pain and uncertainty he had kept hidden behind his confident facade. I don't know, he finally admitted. There were always whispers, half-finished comments that would stop whenever I walked into a room. My mother died when I was 5, and my father never wanted to talk about the circumstances of my birth. Robert always hinted that I wasn't my father's legitimate son, that my mother had an affair. The vulnerability in his voice touched something deep in Abby's heart. She recognized the pain of someone who had grown up with unanswered questions about their own identity, something she understood better than James could possibly imagine. "Does Robert have access to this house?" she asked, keeping her voice professional despite the compassion she felt. "Yes, he's had keys for years. He comes frequently for family gatherings and social events. And," James paused, the realization hitting him like a lightning bolt, "he's an electrical engineer by trade. He studied at Georgia Tech before moving to California." The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place in Abby's mind. Where does he live now? In San Diego. But he travels constantly between the coasts for his job. He could have installed this system during any of his visits over the years. Abby felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the basement. They were dealing with something much more complex and potentially dangerous than she had initially imagined. "James," she said, making a decision she knew would change everything between them, "there's something I need to tell you about my family." James looked at her in surprise. During the hours they had spent working together, he had felt a growing connection with this extraordinary woman, but she had strictly kept their conversations in professional territory. "My grandfather Stephen worked in this house more than 30 years ago," Abby continued, her voice trembling slightly. "He was your grandfather Joaquin's lead electrician during the construction of this mansion." The impact of this revelation resonated in the silence of the study. James stood motionless, processing the implications of what Abby had just told him. "Your grandfather knew my family." "More than that." Abby took a deep breath before continuing. "After he died 3 years ago, I found some things among his belongings. Documents, photographs, and a very old audio tape." "What kind of tape?" "A recording of a conversation between your grandfather Joaquin and your father, made about a year before you were born. My grandfather recorded it because he was worried about something he had heard." James felt the world tilt on its axis. "What had he heard?" Abby looked him directly in the eyes, her heart beating so hard she feared he could hear it. "Your grandfather was asking your father about the paternity of a child who was about to be born, but it wasn't what Robert has always insinuated. The truth is the exact opposite." "I don't understand." "James, according to what my grandfather recorded, Robert is not the legitimate son of your Uncle Michael. He's the son of your grandfather Joaquin. Your grandfather had an affair with his own brother's wife, and Robert is the result of that relationship." The silence that followed was so profound that they could both hear their own heartbeats. James sank into his chair, his mind struggling to process the magnitude of what Abby had just revealed. "Are you saying that Robert is my half-brother?" "Yes, and he probably knows it, or at least suspects it. That's why he's so obsessed with proving you're not the legitimate heir. It's not because he thinks you aren't your father's son, but because he knows he isn't his father's son either." James ran his hands over his face, feeling as if his entire life had been rearranged in a matter of minutes. "Why did your grandfather record that conversation?" "Because your grandfather asked him to keep the secret, but my grandfather was afraid that one day that lie would hurt innocent people. He was a very honest man, and he had a hard time carrying secrets that weren't his." "Where is that tape now?" Abby hesitated before answering. "I have it. I've kept it all these years, not knowing what to do with it. When I saw your last name on the work order to check the electrical system, I thought it might be a coincidence. But when I met you, when I saw the mansion, I knew it couldn't be. Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning?" "Because I didn't know if I could trust you," Abby admitted honestly, "and because that information has the power to destroy lives. Your life, Robert's life, your family's reputation. It's not something you share lightly." James stood up and began to pace the study, his mind working furiously to process all the implications of what he had discovered. If Robert knows the truth about his paternity, that would explain not only the spying, but also his obsession with finding something he can use against me. Exactly. He knows he has no legal right to the inheritance, so he's desperately looking for something he can use to blackmail you or discredit you publicly. And now he's recording every one of my conversations, hoping I'll say something compromising. Abby nodded gravely. The spy system he installed is very sophisticated. It's not just recording conversations, it's also monitoring your phone calls, your emails, probably even your bank transactions if he has access to your computer. The scale of the violation felt overwhelming. James realized that for years he had been living in a glass house, with every aspect of his private life exposed to the eyes of someone who hated him. "What can we do?" he finally asked. "We have a few options," Abby said, adopting her professional tone again. "We can dismantle the spy system and confront Robert directly. We can leave the system running, but modify it to feed him false information. Or we can use it to set a trap and get evidence of what he's doing. Which do you recommend?" Abby studied him carefully before answering. In the few hours they had worked together, she had come to know sides of James that he probably didn't show to anyone else. She had seen his vulnerability, his ability to admit when he didn't know something, his willingness to trust her despite the differences between their worlds. "I think we should set a trap," she said finally, "but it will require you to act for several days as if you know nothing. And it's going to be dangerous." "What kind of dangerous?" "If Robert realizes we've discovered the system, he could become desperate. Desperate people do unpredictable things, and if he's really obsessed with destroying you, we don't know how far he's willing to go." James stared at her, and in that moment something fundamentally changed between them. They were no longer just a wealthy client and a hired electrician. They were two people who had shared deep secrets in the dead of night, who had discovered their lives were connected by invisible threads stretching back decades. "Abby," he said, his voice softer than she had heard it before, "why are you willing to risk yourself for me? You barely know me." The question took her by surprise, forcing her to confront feelings she had been trying to ignore since the moment they met. The truth was there was something about James that awakened a protective instinct in her that went far beyond professional duty. "Because," she began slowly, choosing her words with care, "I know what it feels like to grow up with questions about who you really are, and because no one deserves to have their privacy violated the way they've violated yours." "You have questions about your identity too?" Abby felt a lump form in her throat. "My mother died when I was 2. My father disappeared before I was born. All I know about my family is what my grandfather told me, and he was always very private about the past." The similarity of their stories hit them both at the same time. Two people who had grown up with holes in their family histories, with questions no one could or would answer. "Maybe," James said slowly, "we can help each other find answers." The suggestion hung in the air between them, charged with possibilities that went far beyond solving the immediate problem of the espionage. "First," Abby said, trying to maintain focus on the task at hand, "we need to deal with Robert. When is he scheduled to visit you next?" "He's coming next week for my grandmother Elena's birthday. It's a family tradition he never misses." "Perfect. That gives us time to prepare everything. I'm going to modify the spy system so we can control what information he receives. And we're going to prepare a specific conversation for him to overhear, something that will force him to act in a way that lets us get evidence of what he's doing." "What kind of conversation?" Abby smiled for the first time since they had started working that night, and James felt something light up in his chest at the sight of it. "We're going to make him believe you've found documents proving he isn't the legitimate son of your Uncle Michael, and we're going to make him believe you plan to confront him publicly at the birthday party. Won't that make him more dangerous?" "Yes, but it will also make him more predictable. Desperate people make mistakes, and we're going to be ready to capture those mistakes." James nodded slowly, admiring the way Abby's mind worked with both technical and strategic aspects. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to give me full access to the house for the next week. I'll have to make modifications to the spy system without anyone noticing, and I need you to act completely normal. You can't change any routines or show any sign that you know what's happening. And your grandfather's audio tape." Abby looked at him for several seconds before answering, "I'll bring it tomorrow night. I think you have the right to hear what your grandfather really said about your family. And after that, we decide together what to do with that information." The word "together" resonated between them with a weight they both felt, but neither was ready to fully acknowledge. As they packed up their equipment and prepared to leave, James stopped suddenly. "Abby, there's something else I need to ask you." "What?" "Yesterday, when you showed up in the middle of the blackout, when you solved the problem my specialized technicians couldn't solve, was that really a coincidence?" Abby stood still, feeling the moment had come for a truth she had been avoiding. "No," she finally admitted. "When I saw the work order with your last name, I did a little research on you and your family. I came prepared for a normal electrical check, but I also came hoping for an opportunity to meet you, to see if you were the kind of person who deserved to know the truth about what my grandfather had recorded." "And what was your conclusion?" Abby looked him directly in the eyes, feeling she was about to cross a line from which there was no return. "My conclusion," she said softly, "is that you're exactly the kind of person my grandfather would have wanted to protect." The moment that followed was charged with an emotional tension neither of them had ever experienced. In the intimacy of the night, surrounded by secrets and revelations, they both felt that something fundamental had shifted between them. But before either of them could act on those feelings, the distant sound of an approaching engine snapped them back to reality. "Are you expecting someone?" Abby whispered, her professional training taking over immediately. "No. At this hour, absolutely no one should be coming here." They moved quickly to the study window, staying in the shadows as they watched an unfamiliar car park in the circular driveway. "Do you recognize the car?" Abby asked. James squinted, trying to see in the darkness. "It's a black SUV. I haven't seen it before." As they watched, a figure got out of the vehicle and headed toward the house, with movements that suggested familiarity with the property. "James," Abby whispered, her pulse quickening, "I think we just found out when Robert makes his visits to maintain the spy system." Chapter 3. Abby's heart was beating so hard she was afraid James could hear it in the tense silence of the study. From their position by the window, they watched the figure approach the house with confident steps, clearly knowing the way even in the dark. "We have to get out of here without being seen," Abby whispered, her mind rapidly assessing their escape options. "There's an exit through the kitchen that leads directly to the backyard," James answered in an equally low voice, "but we'd have to go through the main hallway." The sound of a key turning in the front door lock alerted them that whoever had arrived had authorized access to the house. This confirmed Abby's suspicions about the identity of the late-night visitor. "It's him," James murmured, recognizing the specific sound of footsteps in the marble foyer. "Robert always drags his left foot slightly when he walks. It's an old football injury." Abby made a quick decision. "We're staying here. If we move now, we might be heard. Your study has a door that locks from the inside, right?" James nodded, moving silently to secure the door. "But if he comes here, he's not coming here tonight," Abby interrupted with professional confidence. "He's here to check the recording equipment and pick up the week's tapes. He'll go straight to the basement and then leave. He'll probably be here for less than 20 minutes. As they waited in the darkness of the study, Abby moved to the window to keep watch, while James stayed near the door to listen for any movement in the house. The forced proximity in the dark space created an intimacy they both felt intensely. "How can you be so sure of what he's going to do?" James whispered, admiring the professional calm Abby maintained under pressure. "Because I've seen these types of operations before," she replied, her eyes fixed on the yard. "My grandfather taught me that every thief, every saboteur, every person who does things in secret develops patterns. Robert's been doing this for years. He probably always comes at the same time, on the same day of the week, follows the same routine." Sure enough, for the next 15 minutes, they heard movements in the basement, exactly as Abby had predicted. James found it fascinating how she had read the situation, demonstrating a strategic intelligence that went far beyond her technical skills. When they finally heard the front door close and the car's engine fade into the distance, they both felt they could breathe again. "Incredible," James murmured, turning on a small desk lamp that provided the first real light they'd had in hours. "You predicted exactly what would happen." Abby turned to him, and for the first time since they met, James could see her clearly in the soft light. Her green eyes shone with a mixture of residual adrenaline and something deeper that made his breath catch. Her light brown hair had partially escaped her ponytail, framing her face with soft strands that made her look less like the competent professional he had known and more like the beautiful woman she truly was. "My grandfather taught me to observe," she said, seemingly oblivious to the effect she was having on him. "He used to say that electricity and people operate on similar principles. Both follow the path of least resistance, both create patterns, and both can be dangerous if you don't understand them. Your grandfather sounds like he was a very wise man." Abby's expression softened, and James saw for the first time a genuine vulnerability in her green eyes. "He was the closest thing I ever had to a father. When he died, I felt like I had lost my only real connection to the world." "You don't have other family?" "No. And I don't have many close friends either. It's hard to maintain relationships when you spend most of your time working alone, especially in a world where a lot of men don't take you seriously." James felt a pang of guilt, remembering his dismissive comment from the first night. "Abby, about what I said when we first met." "You don't have to apologize again," she interrupted gently. "That comment hurt, but it also motivated me. Sometimes we need to be underestimated to prove what we're really capable of." "Are you underestimated often?" Abby smiled with a mixture of sadness and determination. "All the time. I show up for a job and clients automatically assume I'm the assistant to some male electrician. When I explain that I'm the one doing the work, some of them literally ask me to bring a man to supervise. How do you deal with that? I let my work speak for itself. My grandfather taught me that competence silences critics faster than any argument. James studied her for several seconds, seeing aspects of her character that filled him with admiration. Don't you ever feel lonely in that world? The question touched something deep in Abby, and for a moment her professional mask cracked completely. Constantly, she admitted, with an honesty that surprised even herself. Especially after my grandfather died. Sometimes I go days without having a real conversation with anyone. Is that why you agreed to help me with this? For the company? Abby looked him directly in the eyes, feeling she had reached a point where she had to be completely honest or retreat forever. No, she said slowly. I agreed to help you because when I saw you that first night, when I saw the way you handled the humiliation of a woman solving the problem your technicians couldn't, I saw something in you that I recognized. What did you recognize? I recognized someone who, despite having everything the world considers important, feels fundamentally alone. I recognize someone who is looking for real connections in a world full of superficiality. Abby's words struck James like a lightning bolt because they described exactly what he had been feeling for years without being able to articulate it. His whole life had been surrounded by people who wanted something from him, his money, his connections, his status, but very few who wanted him simply for who he was. How can you see that so clearly? He asked, his voice more vulnerable than it had ever been with another person. Because I feel the same way, Abby admitted. The only difference is that I'm alone because the world doesn't see me, and you're alone because the world only sees what you have, not who you are. The moment that followed was charged with an emotional tension that both felt like an electric current between them. James realized that this extraordinary woman had seen him in a way no one else ever had, and Abby realized she had revealed parts of herself she had never shared with anyone. Abby, James said softly, taking a step toward her, can I ask you something personal? You've already asked me a lot of personal things tonight, she replied with a shy smile. Have you ever been in love? The question took her completely by surprise, not because of its personal nature, but because it forced her to face the fact that what she was feeling for James in that moment was different from anything she had ever experienced before. Once, she answered honestly, when I was 20. His name was Martin, another electrician I met at a technical training. What happened? He married a woman his family approved of, a woman who didn't threaten his masculinity with tools and technical knowledge. James felt a wave of anger toward a man he had never met. Did he hurt you badly? He taught me that men can be attracted to independent women, but few are willing to build a life with one. And since then I've been very careful not to confuse professional admiration with romantic interest, and I've learned that most men who say they want a strong woman really want a woman who acts strong when it's convenient for them, and acts weak when they need to feel superior. James moved closer to her until they were only inches apart. In the soft light of the desk lamp, Abby could see that his blue eyes were filled with an intensity that made her feel as if he could read her most intimate thoughts. And what do you think of men who recognize that you're stronger than them and admire that strength? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Abby's heart began to beat so hard she was sure James could hear it. It depends, she answered, struggling to maintain her composure, on whether they truly admire it or if they're just trying to conquer something they see as a challenge. And how can you tell the difference? Abby looked into his eyes for several seconds that felt like an eternity. I think you see it in the small moments, in whether they listen when you talk about work, in whether they respect your professional decisions, in whether they see you as an equal partner or as temporary entertainment. James slowly lifted his hand and placed it gently on Abby's cheek, and she felt as if every nerve ending in her body had ignited at once. Abby, he murmured, tonight you've taught me things about my own family that I never would have discovered alone. You've protected me from an enemy I didn't even know I had, and you've shown me a strength and an intelligence that have left me completely fascinated. Abby's eyes filled with an emotion that overwhelmed her completely. James, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since that first night, he continued. Not just because you solved the electrical problem, but because of the way you held your head high when everyone looked at you like you didn't belong. Because of the way you looked me straight in the eye after my stupid comment. Because of the way you talked to machines as if they were friends. You shouldn't be saying this, Abby whispered, but she didn't pull away from his touch. Why not? Because we're from completely different worlds. Because when this problem with Robert is over, you'll go back to your normal life, and I'll go back to mine, and this will become a beautiful but impossible memory. James brought his face closer to hers until their breaths mingled in the air between them. And what if I don't want it to be a memory? What if I want it to be the beginning of something? Before Abby could answer, James kissed her gently, a kiss full of all the tenderness and admiration that had been building since the moment he met her. Abby felt as if all the lights in the house had turned on at once, illuminating places in her heart that had been dark for years. When they finally broke apart, they were both trembling slightly. "James," Abby said, her voice thick with emotion, "you can't kiss a woman like me and then expect us to act like nothing happened." "I don't want to act like nothing happened," he replied, keeping his hands on her face. "I want this to be the beginning of everything." "The beginning of what, exactly?" "The beginning of us really getting to know each other. The beginning of building something real together. The beginning of us never being alone again." The words touched exactly what Abby had been feeling, but hadn't dared to hope for. "Are you sure you know what you're getting into? I'm not the kind of woman that men like you usually build a life with." "Men like me," James repeated with a smile that completely transformed his face, "apparently don't know how to recognize extraordinary women when we have them right in front of us. But I'm learning." Abby smiled, despite the tears that had begun to form in her eyes. "And what are you going to do with that education?" "I'm going to convince you to give me a chance to prove that some men do know how to appreciate women who are smarter, stronger, and braver than we are." "That's going to take a lot of work," Abby said, but her smile indicated the idea didn't scare her. "Well," James replied, kissing her again, this time with more confidence, "I have the advantage of already knowing the best electrician in Atlanta. I'm sure she can teach me how to keep the connections working." The pun made them both laugh, breaking the intense emotional tension and replacing it with something lighter but equally profound. "Before we go any further with this," Abby said, regaining some of her professional composure, "we need to finish what we started with Robert. I can't really be with you while you have this unresolved problem hanging over you." "Why?" "Because I need to know that you're choosing to be with me because you really want me, not because you need me to rescue you from a difficult situation." James immediately understood the wisdom in what she was saying. "You're right, but I want you to know that what I'm feeling for you has nothing to do with the problem with Robert. That started the moment you walked into my dining room with that defiant look." "Really? Really? But I respect what you're saying. Let's finish this with Robert first, and then we'll explore what can be between us." Abby nodded, feeling more secure in her decision, seeing that James understood her reasoning without being offended. "So," she said, gradually returning to her professional mode, "tomorrow night I'll bring my grandfather's audio tape. You're going to hear exactly what your grandfather said about your family, and then we're going to plan exactly how we're going to use Robert's spy system against him. And after that?" Abby looked at him with a smile that held promises that made James's heart race again. "After that, we're going to see if a hotel tycoon and an electrician can find a way to build something beautiful together." As they packed their equipment and prepared to leave, they both felt that something fundamental had changed between them. They were no longer strangers brought together by circumstance, but two people who had found a connection neither had expected. At the door, James gently took Abby's hand. "Abby, there's one more thing I need you to know." "What?" "Regardless of what happens with Robert, regardless of what we find out about our families, I'm not going to let you go easily. For the first time in my life, I've found someone who truly sees me, and I'm not going to waste that opportunity." Abby felt a lump form in her throat from the intensity of the emotion in his voice. "James, if we're going to do this, it has to be as equals. You can't be with me because you're lonely or because you find me an interesting novelty. It's not that," he said firmly. "I want to be with you because you're intelligent, brave, compassionate, and real in a way I've never found before. I want to be with you because when I'm near you I feel like the best version of myself." The words were exactly what Abby needed to hear. "Then," she said softly, "let's solve this with Robert, and then let's see what kind of future an electrician and a hotelier can build together." As James watched her drive away in her old car into the quiet early morning streets, he felt that for the first time in years, he had something real to fight for. Not just his inheritance or his reputation, but the chance to build an authentic life with a woman who had seen him for who he really was and had decided he was worth getting to know better. And as Abby drove back to her small apartment in Cabbagetown, she felt as if all the city lights were shining brighter. For the first time since her grandfather's death, she didn't feel completely alone in the world. She had found someone who not only respected her strength but admired her for it. Tomorrow there would be work to do, secrets to reveal, and a dangerous confrontation to plan. But tonight, they both fell asleep with the feeling that they had found something worth more than any inheritance or reputation. They had found the possibility of a true and authentic love. However, Neither of them knew that Robert had noticed Abby's car leaving the property that night and that he was already planning his next move in a game that was about to become far more dangerous than either of them had imagined. Did this story of love and mystery grab you? Do you think Abby and James can expose Robert before he discovers them? Let us know in the comments where you're reading from and what you think will happen when Abby shows James the tape. If you want to know how this story full of family secrets and true love continues, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. The story is just beginning, and the most intense moments are yet to come. Chapter 4. The following week unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance between truth and lies. Abby arrived at the mansion each night after midnight, when the streets of Buckhead were empty, and only the night watchman patrolled the exclusive neighborhood. James always waited for her at the side entrance, and each meeting was charged with a tension that had nothing to do with the danger of their clandestine mission. During those nights of silent work, Abby meticulously modified Robert's espionage system. With the precision of a surgeon, she installed devices that would allow her to control exactly which conversations reached Robert's ears, while documenting every aspect of the surveillance system that had been violating James's privacy for years. "It's incredible how sophisticated this is," Abby murmured on the third night, as she examined a particularly advanced transmission device in the basement. "Robert isn't just recording conversations, he's analyzing voice patterns, identifying emotional states, even monitoring your heart rate when you talk on the phone." James moved closer to see what she was pointing at, his proximity making Abby intensely aware of the scent of his skin and the warmth radiating from his body. Why would he need that information? He's trying to create a complete psychological profile of you. He wants to know when you're nervous, when you're lying, when you're emotionally vulnerable. It's like he's studying you the way a scientist studies a specimen. The calculated coldness of Robert's operation made James feel sick. How long do you think he's been doing this? From the components I'm seeing and the level of sophistication, I'd say at least 5 years, possibly more. Abby looked up at him, her green eyes full of compassion. "James, this means Robert has been planning something against you since long before your grandfather died." The magnitude of the betrayal hit James like a wave. Robert hadn't started spying on him after the inheritance. He had been preparing his attack for years, waiting for the perfect moment to act. "Do you have everything ready for the fake conversation?" Abby asked, noticing James needed to change the subject before the anger overwhelmed him. "Yes. Tomorrow night I'm going to make a phone call Robert won't be able to ignore. I'm going to tell my lawyer that I've found documents proving Robert isn't my Uncle Michael's legitimate son, and that I plan to confront him publicly at my grandmother's birthday party." "Perfect. That will force him to act quickly, and we'll be ready to document everything he does." As they worked in silence, Abby was aware of James watching her with a frequency that went beyond professional curiosity. Every time their hands accidentally brushed while handling wires, every time he held the flashlight to illuminate her work, every time she explained a technical aspect and saw the genuine admiration in his eyes, she felt the connection between them strengthening. "Can I ask you a personal question?" James asked during a break as they drank coffee that Mrs. Davis had left in a thermos. "After everything we've shared this week, I think you have the right to ask any question you want. What made you decide to become an electrician? It couldn't have been an easy choice, especially for a woman." Abby smiled, remembering moments from her childhood that had shaped who she had become. "When I was 8, my grandmother got very sick. She had heart problems and needed a pacemaker, but we didn't have the money to pay for the surgery." James listened with complete attention, noticing how Abby's voice softened when she spoke of her family. "My grandfather worked day and night for months, taking any electrical job he could find. I would go with him because there was no one to stay with me, and I started helping by passing him tools, holding flashlights, learning the names of all the components." "Did you manage to pay for the surgery?" "Yes, but my grandmother died 3 days after the operation. Her heart was just too weak." Abby's eyes filled with tears she didn't shed. "That night, while my grandfather was crying in the kitchen thinking I was asleep, I heard him tell my grandmother that he would never again let a lack of money stop us from taking care of the people we love. And you decided to continue his work. I decided that if I was going to live in a world where women like us have to fight for everything, at least I was going to fight with the tools he had taught me to use." Abby looked him directly in the eyes. "Electricity doesn't discriminate, James. It doesn't care if you're a man or a woman, rich or poor. If you understand the rules and respect the power, it works for you." James felt a deep admiration for this woman who had transformed the pain of loss into purpose and determination. "Did your grandfather live to see you become a professional?" "Yes, and he was very proud, but he also worried that it would be a very lonely life for me. He always said he hoped that one day I would find someone who valued my mind as much as my heart. The conversation hung in the air between them, charged with a meaning they both felt, but neither voiced directly. It was that same night that Abby finally brought the audio tape she had been promising. She had kept it in a rusty metal box that had belonged to her grandfather, along with some black and white photographs and time-yellowed documents. "Are you sure you want to hear this?" Abby asked, holding the old tape in her hands. "Once you know the truth, you can't go back." James took the tape with slightly trembling hands. "I need to know. I've lived my whole life with questions, and I think it's time for some answers." Abby had brought an old cassette player she had found in her grandfather's workshop. Carefully, she inserted the tape and pressed play. The sound that emerged was full of static and interference, but the voices were clearly distinguishable. The first voice was that of an older man, with a classic southern accent from the older generation. James immediately recognized the voice of his grandfather Joaquin, though it sounded younger and stronger than he remembered. "Michael, we need to talk about the boy," Joaquin's voice said. "Which boy, Dad?" replied another male voice that James recognized as his uncle Michael. "The boy your wife is going to have, Robert." There was a long pause on the recording, filled only with the distant sound of power tools. "I don't understand what you're talking about." "Michael, we both know Robert isn't your son." The silence that followed was so tense that James could feel his own heart beating in his ears. "What are you saying?" Michael asked, his voice now tinged with an emotion that could have been anger or pain. "I'm saying I made a terrible mistake. I'm saying I ruined your marriage and your life over one night of stupidity and selfishness, and I'm saying we need to decide what we're going to do about it." James felt the world stop around him. The confirmation of what Abby had suggested hit with the full force of reality. "Did Patricia tell you the boy is yours?" "She didn't have to. I did the math, Michael. And besides, the boy looks like me. He looks like my own son." James's eyes filled with tears as he heard his grandfather mention his own father's name, establishing the family connection that Robert had been so desperately denying. "What do you want me to do?" Michael asked, his voice now broken with emotion. "I want you to raise Robert as your son. I want him to never know the truth, and I want to give you half of everything I have to make up for what I've taken from you. I don't want your money, Dad." "Then take it for Robert. Take it because he's going to need financial security when he grows up, and because I need to know that if anything happens to me, both my own boy and Robert will be protected." James paused the recording, his hands trembling as he processed the implications of what he had heard. "Your grandfather was trying to protect everyone," Abby said softly, taking his hand to comfort him. "But why is Robert so obsessed with destroying me if my grandfather had already provided for him?" "Because Robert suspects the truth, but he doesn't fully understand it. He probably knows he's not Michael's son, but he assumes that means he's not entitled to anything. He doesn't know your grandfather specifically provided for him." James restarted the recording, needing to hear the rest of the conversation. "There's something else, Michael," Joaquin's voice continued. "If Robert ever finds out the truth, I need you to know that I plan to divide the company equally between him and my own son. They're brothers, even if they can never know it. And what if your son turns out to be more capable of running the business? Then Robert will have to be satisfied with his share and find his own way, but they will both have equal opportunities." "And Patricia? What are we going to tell her?" "Patricia is going to take that information to the grave, just like us. The only record of this conversation is what your electrician is accidentally recording with his testing equipment." James and Abby looked at each other. Abby's grandfather had been recording sound tests for the house's electrical system and had accidentally captured the most important conversation in the history of the Anderson family. The recording continued for a few more minutes, with details about financial arrangements and promises to keep the secret. When it finally ended, James sat in silence for a long time, processing decades of information that recontextualized his entire life. "Robert is my cousin," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper, "but he's also my uncle's half-brother and my grandfather's son." "Yes, and your grandfather had already planned to provide for him. Robert is risking everything to claim something that was already his by right. Why didn't my grandfather tell me any of this before he died?" Abby considered the question carefully. Maybe he thought the truth would do more harm than good. Or maybe he hoped Robert would never question the situation, and the truth could die with him. But Robert is questioning it, and he's destroying his own life in the process. "What are you going to do with this information?" James got up and began to pace the study, his mind working to process all the implications of what he had learned. "I'm going to confront him," he said finally, "but not in the way I had planned. I'm not going to use this to destroy him. I'm going to use it to save him." "What do you mean?" I'm going to offer him exactly what my grandfather wanted him to have, an equal share of the company. But in return, he has to stop spying on me and confess what he's been doing. Abby felt a surge of admiration for James's generosity, but also a practical concern. And what if he doesn't accept? What if he's so obsessed with the idea that he deserves nothing that he rejects what you're offering? Then we'll have to find another way to reach him. But first, I want to try to do the right thing. That night, as they prepared to implement the final plan, James took Abby's hands in his. Abby, regardless of what happens tomorrow with Robert, I need you to know something. What? This week with you has changed me. Not just because you helped me discover the truth about my family, but because you helped me discover the truth about myself. What truth? That I've been living a life that wasn't really mine, surrounding myself with people who didn't really know me, doing things I didn't really care about, being someone I wasn't really. Abby's heart raced at the emotional intensity in his voice. With you, I feel like the person I really am. I feel seen, valued, understood in a way I've never experienced. James, no, let me finish. I know we said we'd solve the Robert problem before exploring what's between us, but I need you to know that what I feel for you isn't gratitude or convenience or temporary fascination. It's love. The word hung in the air between them like an electric spark. I love you, James repeated, his voice firmer. I love your intelligence, your strength, your compassion, your integrity. I love the way you see the world, the way you see me, and I want to build a life with you. Abby's eyes filled with tears that this time she didn't hold back. James, I love you too, but what? But tomorrow night, when we confront Robert, all of this could change. We could discover things that complicate everything. And I need to know that what you feel for me will survive whatever happens. James kissed her with a tenderness that answered all her questions without words. Abby, what I feel for you could survive anything, but I understand your concerns, and I respect your need to be sure. So tomorrow night, after it's all over, after we know exactly what we're dealing with, we'll talk about the future. It's a promise. The next day, the tension in the mansion was palpable. James went about his normal routines, but Abby could see the anticipation in every one of his movements. That afternoon, as she was making the final adjustments to the monitoring system they had installed, she received a call that filled her with panic. Abby? The voice on the phone was Mrs. Davis, and she sounded terrified. What's wrong, Mrs. Davis? Something's wrong. Very wrong. You have to come right now. Where's James? I don't know. He left this morning for a business meeting and hasn't come back. And there's someone in the house. What do you mean there's someone in the house? Robert showed up an hour ago, but he's not acting normal. He's checking everything, moving furniture, digging through places he's never gone before, and he has some men with him. Abby's heart stopped. What kind of men? Scary men, honey. Men who don't talk, who just stare. I think they know something. Mrs. Davis, listen to me very carefully. I want you to get out of the house immediately. Go to your sister's house and don't come back until I call you. And what are you going to do? I'm going to find James, and we're going to solve this. As Abby drove desperately toward the mansion, her mind worked furiously to understand what had gone wrong. Robert wasn't supposed to arrive until tomorrow night. The fake phone call hadn't even happened yet. Something had alerted Robert prematurely, and James was missing. For the first time since this whole adventure had begun, Abby felt real fear. Not just for herself, but for the man she had fallen in love with, who could now be in mortal danger. As she approached the mansion, she saw several unfamiliar cars parked in the driveway. Through the lit windows, she could see silhouettes moving with purpose, searching for something specific. Abby parked her car a block away and approached on foot, using the skills of silent movement she had learned over years of night work in other people's houses. She needed to find out what had happened to James, and she needed to do it without being detected. But as she crept toward the mansion, she didn't know that James was also heading there, having received a threatening call from Robert that had filled him with terror. And neither of them knew that Robert had discovered not only the monitoring system they had installed, but also Abby's identity and her connection to the deepest secrets of the Anderson family. The final confrontation was about to begin, and the lives of everyone involved were on the line. Chapter 5. The Anderson estate had never seemed as threatening as it did on that February night, as Abby approached silently through the backyard, her heart pounding so hard she feared it could be heard through the illuminated windows. Through the glass, she could see figures moving with military purpose, searching each room as if looking for something specific and vital. Abby immediately recognized Robert Anderson when he stopped in front of the study window. At 35, he had a sturdier build than James, with black hair that was beginning to show premature gray at the temples, and an expression of desperate determination that deeply alarmed her. His eyes, the same clear blue as James's, shone with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Using the skills she had developed over years of late-night electrical work, Abby managed to get close enough to hear snippets of conversation through a partially open window. "It has to be here," Robert was saying to one of the three men accompanying him. "My recording equipment picked up conversations about old documents, about evidence that could destroy everything I've worked to build." "What kind of documents?" asked one of the men, a burly type whose intimidating presence immediately put Abby on high alert. These weren't normal private investigators. They were the kind of men who solved problems in ways the law didn't approve of. "Documents that prove I'm not the legitimate son of Michael Anderson," Robert answered, his voice thick with bitterness. "Documents that could justify James cutting me out of the inheritance completely." Abby felt a pang of painful irony. Robert was destroying his own life over information that, if he understood it correctly, would actually entitle him to more than he had ever hoped for. It was then that she heard the sound of a car approaching quickly up the main driveway. Through the yard she could see the headlights of James's Mercedes cutting through the darkness as he headed straight for the house. "Perfect," Robert murmured with a humorless smile. "He's arrived exactly when I expected." Abby realized with horror that Robert had specifically planned this confrontation for tonight. Somehow he had managed to lure James back to the house, possibly with threats or some form of blackmail. As James walked through the front door, Abby could hear his voice clearly through the window. "Robert, what the hell is going on here? Your message said you had information about Abby. If you've hurt her, I swear I'll—" "Easy, cousin." Robert's voice was calm but laced with venom. "Your little electrician is fine for now, but I think it's time you and I had a very serious conversation about family secrets." James entered the study where Robert was waiting, flanked by the three men Abby had seen searching the house. The tension in the room was so thick it could be felt even from outside. "What secrets are you talking about?" Robert smiled with an expression that chilled the blood. "Are you really going to pretend you don't know? Are you going to act like you haven't been digging into my past, into my parentage, into my right to be in this family?" "Robert, I don't know what you're talking about." "Liar!" Robert's composure suddenly shattered, revealing years of accumulated pain and resentment. "I've been recording your every conversation for years, James. I've heard every phone call, every meeting, every intimate moment of your pathetic life." James stood motionless, processing the confirmation of what he already knew, but which hurt to hear directly. "For years I waited for you to say something, to reveal that you knew the secret that's been rotting inside me since I was a teenager. But you're either too stupid or too arrogant to have ever noticed." "What secret, Robert?" Robert stepped up to James until he was inches from his face. "The secret that I'm not the son of Michael Anderson. The secret that my mother had an affair. The secret that I'm a bastard with no right to anything the Anderson name represents." Abby's heart broke hearing the genuine pain in Robert's voice. For decades, he had been consumed by a partial truth that had filled him with shame and self-hatred. "Robert," James said softly, "there are things you don't understand." "Like what?" "Like the fact that your little electrician has been helping you spy on me. Like the fact that she has information about our family that she's been using to manipulate you." Abby's heart stopped. Robert knew about her involvement. "What are you talking about?" "Your dear Abby is the granddaughter of Stephen Scott, the electrician who worked on this house decades ago. And it turns out her grandfather recorded some very interesting conversations during his installation work." James kept his expression neutral, but Abby could see the tension in his shoulders. "Conversations between your grandfather Joaquin and my supposed father Michael. Conversations about family secrets that could destroy lives. Have you heard these recordings?" "Not directly, but I've been pressing some people who knew Stephen Scott to tell me what he knew. And what I discovered is that your girlfriend has evidence that could finish me for good." Robert walked to his desk and opened a large envelope, pulling out photographs and documents. "So I decided to take some preventive measures. I hired some investigators to find out exactly what kind of evidence Abby has, and to help me acquire it." The photographs Robert spread across the desk made James feel sick. They were images of Abby in her apartment, in her workshop, in places where she should have had complete privacy. Robert had been stalking her for weeks. "What do you want?" James asked, his voice dangerously low. "I want you to call your girlfriend and tell her to bring all the recordings, all the documents, all the evidence her grandfather collected about our family, and I want her to hand it over to me. And if she refuses—" Robert smiled in a way that sent shivers down Abby's spine from her listening post. "Let's just say I have ways of being very persuasive." It was at that moment that Abby made the bravest decision of her life. She couldn't stay hidden while Robert threatened James and demanded evidence that he completely misunderstood. It was time for everyone to know the truth. Abby moved silently toward the front entrance, using a key James had given her during their week of work. Her plan was simple but risky. She was going to walk in and reveal the whole truth about her grandfather's recording, regardless of the consequences. As she moved through the familiar hallways of the mansion, she could hear the conversation in the study growing more tense. "Robert," James was saying, "there are things about our family you don't know, things that would completely change how you see the situation." "Like what?" "Like the fact that Grandfather Joaquin already provided for you in his will, like the fact that he always planned for you to have an equal share of the company." Robert stood motionless. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you've been fighting for something that was already yours." "Liar. The will left me a minimal amount. You inherited everything. The will you know was just the public one. There were additional provisions that were set to activate when you turned 35. Abby realized James was improvising, trying to de-escalate the situation without revealing the full truth, but she also realized Robert wasn't buying it. "Prove it," Robert said coldly. "I can't prove it without the documents in the lawyer's safe, but I can prove something else to you." "What?" "I can prove to you the real reason Grandfather Joaquin wanted to protect you." James took a deep breath, making a decision that would change everything. "Robert, you are not a bastard with no right to the inheritance. You are my half-brother." The silence that followed was so profound that Abby could hear her own heart beating. "What?" Robert's voice was barely a whisper. "Your mother didn't have an affair with a stranger. She had an affair with Grandfather Joaquin. You are the son of Joaquin Anderson, just like my father was." Robert staggered as if he had been physically struck. "That's impossible." "It's not. And I have the evidence to prove it." It was at that moment that Abby decided it was time to make her entrance. She took a deep breath, walked to the study, and knocked softly on the door before opening it. "Excuse the interruption," she said, with a calm she didn't feel, "but I think it's time everyone heard the whole truth." James's eyes lit up with relief at the sight of her, but also with terror for her safety. Robert and his men turned toward her with expressions ranging from surprise to direct threat. "Abby," James said, "you shouldn't be here." "Yes, I should," she replied firmly, pulling the old cassette player and the tape containing her grandfather's recording from her bag. "Because I have something Robert needs to hear." Robert studied her for several seconds, seeing for the first time in person the woman he had been investigating for weeks. "So you're the famous electrician," he said finally. "Prettier than I expected. And you're Robert Anderson," Abby replied, unintimidated. "Son of Joaquin Anderson, half-uncle to James Anderson, and the rightful heir to a fortune you've been trying to claim by destroying the only family you have left." "I'm not related to anyone," Robert spat. "I'm a bastard who—" "You're an idiot," Abby interrupted with a firmness that surprised everyone in the room. "You're an idiot who has wasted years of his life hating himself over incomplete information." Abby walked to the desk and placed the cassette player down, inserting the tape with decisive movements. "This recording was made by my grandfather more than 30 years ago during the electrical installation of this house. It contains a conversation between your grandfather Joaquin and your father Michael about your true parentage." "I already know what it says," Robert muttered. "It says I'm a bastard." "No," Abby said firmly, pressing the play button. "It says you're an Anderson." The recording began to play, and for the second time in a week, the voice of the patriarch Joaquin Anderson filled the study with revelations that had been buried for decades. As Robert listened to the conversation between his grandfather and Michael, Abby watched his face cycle through a full range of emotions: confusion, realization, pain, and finally, an understanding that changed him completely. When the recording reached the part where Joaquin explained his plan to provide equally for both family lines, Robert collapsed into a chair as if his legs had lost all strength. "I don't understand," he murmured when the recording finished. "Grandfather was—" "My father?" "Yes," James said softly, approaching Robert for the first time in years without animosity. "And he always planned for you to know the truth when you were mature enough to handle it." "But why did they never tell me anything?" Abby stepped forward to answer. "Because your grandfather wanted to protect Michael. He wanted to protect the memory of your mother, and he wanted to protect you from the scandal. He planned to reveal the truth in his own time." "And why do you have this information?" Robert asked, looking at Abby with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "Because my grandfather was an honest man who worried about secrets hurting innocent people. He recorded that conversation by accident, and he kept it for decades, hoping that one day he could use that information to help instead of hurt." Robert looked at the 3 men he had brought with him, and for the first time since he'd arrived, he seemed to realize the magnitude of what he had been doing. "Get out," he told them sharply. "Get out now and never speak of this to anyone." The men exchanged glances but obeyed, leaving the mansion and leaving Robert, James, and Abby alone with decades of newly revealed truths. "James," Robert said after they were alone, his voice breaking with emotion. "I've spent years hating you for something that wasn't your fault. I violated your privacy. I threatened your safety. Robert," James interrupted gently, "we're family, and family makes mistakes. How can you forgive me after everything I've done?" James glanced at Abby before answering, and she could see in his eyes the wisdom that true love had brought to his life. "Because I've learned that life is too short to waste on resentment, and because I've learned that the best things in life happen when we have the courage to forgive and start over." Robert turned to Abby, and for the first time since he had arrived, his eyes showed genuine vulnerability. "Abby, I don't know how to thank you for holding on to this information for years and for having the courage to share it when it was needed." "Don't thank me," she replied. "Thank my grandfather. He always believed that the truth, even if it hurt, was better than living a lie." "What happens now?" Robert asked, looking between James and Abby. "Now," James said, "we start acting like the family we were always meant to be, and we find ways to honor Grandfather Joaquin's memory by building something positive with the information he left us." "And the business?" "The business can be restructured. There are ways to make you an equal partner without destroying what we've already built." Robert nodded slowly, and for the first time in years Abby could see peace in his eyes. "And you two?" Robert asked, noticing the way James and Abby looked at each other. "Is there something I should know about this partnership?" James took Abby's hand, lacing his fingers through hers with a naturalness that felt perfect. "There is something you should know," James said. "I've fallen in love with the most extraordinary woman I have ever met. And if she'll have me, I plan to spend the rest of my life proving to her that it was worth risking everything for love." Abby felt tears of happiness well up in her eyes. "Is that your way of asking me to build a future together?" "It's my way of asking you to teach me how to keep the light of love burning for the rest of our lives." As James and Abby kissed in the study, where so many secrets had been revealed, Robert smiled for the first time in years. He finally understood that he hadn't lost a family. He had gained one, but none of the three knew that their greatest challenge was yet to come, because someone else had been listening that night, someone who had their own plans for the newly revealed secrets of the Anderson family. And that person was about to test everything James and Abby had built together. Chapter 6. 3 weeks after the revelation that changed the family dynamic forever, life had settled into a new and strangely beautiful rhythm for everyone involved. James and Robert had begun the legal process of restructuring the company to reflect their equal partnership, and for the first time in years the Anderson brothers were working together instead of against each other. Abby had set up a small office in the mansion, from where she coordinated not only the electrical maintenance of the Anderson properties, but also the development of her new project, a technical school for young women from low-income backgrounds who wanted to learn trades traditionally dominated by men. It was a sunny March morning when everything changed again. Abby was in the mansion's backyard, installing a special outdoor lighting system she had designed for the engagement party James had secretly begun to plan, when Mrs. Davis ran out of the house with a panicked expression that immediately alarmed her. "Abby, you have to come quickly. There's a woman at the front door who says she's your grandfather's sister, and she has news that she says will change everything we think we know about your family." Abby's heart stopped. Her grandfather had never mentioned having any living siblings, and she had grown up believing she had no extended family. She headed toward the front entrance, where she found an older woman of about 70, with perfectly coiffed silver hair and green eyes that were unsettlingly similar to her own. She wore simple but good quality clothes, and her posture spoke of dignity and determination. "Are you Abigail Scott?" the woman asked, studying Abby's face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Yes, I am. And you are?" "My name is Elena Scott Morales. I am your grandfather, Stephen's sister." Abby felt her breath catch. "But my grandfather never mentioned—" "Your grandfather had very good reasons for not mentioning his family," Elena interrupted. "Reasons that have to do with secrets far more complicated than you can imagine." At that moment, James appeared from inside the house, having heard unfamiliar voices. When he saw Elena, he stopped abruptly. "Grandma Elena?" he said in total surprise. "What are you doing here?" Abby looked between James and the older woman, feeling the world begin to spin in a very familiar and very dangerous way. "You know each other?" she asked, in a voice she could barely hear. "Elena is James's grandmother," the older woman said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And you, my dear girl, are much more than an electrician's granddaughter." James stepped forward, his confusion evident. "Grandma, I don't understand. How do you know Abby?" Eleanor looked between the two young people, and Abby could see decades of secrets weighing on her shoulders. "We had better sit down," Elena said finally, "because what I have to tell you will change everything you think you know about your families." They moved to the main living room, where Mrs. Davis served coffee while Elena gathered her thoughts. Abby noticed the older woman's hands were trembling slightly, suggesting that what she was about to reveal was as difficult for her to say as it would be for them to hear. "Abby," Elena began, "your grandfather Stephen was my younger brother, but he was also much more than that to the Anderson family." "What do you mean?" "Stephen didn't just work for Joaquin Anderson during the construction of this house. He worked for him for over 20 years, maintaining not only the electrical systems, but also keeping secrets that Joaquin needed to protect." James leaned forward. "What kind of secrets?" "Secrets about you, James, and secrets about your true inheritance." Eleanor reached into her bag and pulled out a yellowed envelope that looked like it had been handled many times over the years. "After Joaquin died, Stephen brought me these documents. He told me that if anything happened to him, I had to make sure they got into the right hands at the right time." "What documents?" Abby asked, feeling a mixture of anticipation and terror. "Documents that proved the inheritance James received was not the complete inheritance Joaquin had planned for him." Eleanor opened the envelope and spread several legal documents on the coffee table. Joaquin had established a separate trust that would activate when James married and started his own family. A trust that would double the original inheritance and included properties in Mexico and the United States that no one knew about. James stared at the documents in amazement. "Why did I never know about this?" "Because Joaquin wanted to make sure you married for love, not for financial convenience. The trust would only activate if you married someone that Stephen considered authentic and genuine." Abby felt her stomach drop. "My grandfather was the one who had to approve of James's choice of wife." "Yes," Eleanor confirmed. "Joaquin trusted Stephen's judgment more than anyone else's, and Stephen had specific instructions on what to look for in a future wife for James." James took Abby's hand, feeling the tension in her body. "What kind of instructions?" "She had to be an independent, hard-working woman who wasn't interested in James's money. She had to be someone who valued honesty, integrity, and hard work." Elena looked directly at Abby. "She had to be someone who could keep family secrets when necessary." The silence that followed was heavy with implications neither of them had considered. "Are you saying," Abby asked slowly, "that my grandfather set me up with James to see if I was suitable?" "Not exactly." Elena smiled for the first time since she had arrived. "Stephen died before you two met, but he had set up circumstances that would make it likely for you to meet." "What kind of circumstances?" "Your grandfather specifically recommended that Abby's electrical security company be hired for the maintenance of the Anderson properties. He knew that eventually there would be an emergency that would require her specialized services." James and Abby looked at each other, remembering the night of the blackout that had started it all. "But that means," James began. "It means your meeting wasn't entirely accidental," Elena confirmed. "But it also means that everything that has happened between you since has been completely authentic." Elena turned to Abby with an expression of maternal affection. "My dear child, your grandfather spent years watching you grow, seeing you develop the exact qualities that Joaquin had specified. But he never interfered in your life or manipulated your decisions. He simply created opportunities. And what if James and I hadn't fallen in love? Then the trust would have remained dormant, and you would have gone on with your separate lives. Stephen and Joaquin were betting that two genuinely good people would recognize each other when they met. Robert chose that moment to enter the room, returning from a business meeting in downtown Atlanta. When he saw Elena, his face lit up with genuine joy. "Grandma Elena, I didn't know you'd be here today." "Robert, dear." Elena stood to hug him. "I came to deliver some important documents to James and Abby." "What kind of documents?" Eleanor briefly explained the situation, and Robert listened with growing astonishment. "So James is going to receive an additional inheritance when he gets married?" "If he marries the right person, yes." Robert looked between James and Abby with a smile that completely transformed his face. "Well, that's not going to be a problem at all." "Why do you say that with such confidence?" Eleanor asked. "Because anyone who sees them together can tell they're crazy about each other, and because Abby is exactly the kind of woman great-grandfather Joaquin would have chosen for the family." Elena studied Abby for several minutes, noticing the way she held James's hand, the way her eyes shone when she looked at him, the way she responded to Robert's jokes with genuine warmth. "Stephen was right," she murmured finally. "He knew exactly what he was doing." "Does that mean you approve of our relationship?" James asked, a note of vulnerability in his voice that he rarely showed. "My boy," Eleanor said tenderly, "you don't need anyone's approval to love each other, but you have the blessing of two grandfathers who loved you enough to plan a beautiful future for you." Abby felt tears well up in her eyes. "My grandfather really planned all of this." Your grandfather believed in the power of true love, Elena replied. And he believed that when two people are meant to be together, the universe conspires to unite them. It was at that moment that James stood up suddenly, with a determination that filled the entire room. "Abby," he said, taking both of her hands in his, "there's something I've wanted to ask you for weeks, but I was waiting for the perfect moment." "James," Abby began, her heart racing. "There is no perfect moment," he continued, "because every moment with you is already perfect." To Abby's complete surprise, James knelt before her in the living room, where so many family secrets had been revealed. "Abigail Scott," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, "you taught me that true love isn't finding someone you can live with. It's finding someone you can't live without." He took a small velvet box from his pocket, revealing a ring that immediately took Abby's breath away. It wasn't an ostentatious or excessively expensive ring, but a unique piece designed specifically for her, a central emerald surrounded by small diamonds that created a pattern resembling electrical circuits. "This ring was designed to represent the way you've brought light into my life," James explained. "The diamonds are set like electrical connections because you taught me that love, like electricity, flows best when the connections are strong and authentic." Abby was crying openly now, overwhelmed by the beauty of the moment and the perfection of the symbolism. "Abby, would you do me the honor of being my wife, of building a life with me, of teaching me for the rest of our days how to keep the light of love burning?" "Yes," Abby whispered, her voice broken with emotion. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." As James slipped the ring onto her finger, Robert and Elena applauded, and Mrs. Davis, who had been watching from the kitchen doorway, joined the celebration with tears of joy in her eyes. "Perfect," Eleanor exclaimed. "Now I can activate the trust and deliver the final gift that Joaquin and Stephen planned for you." "There's more?" Abby asked, feeling overwhelmed by the day's revelations. "Oh, yes," Eleanor smiled mysteriously, "but that surprise will have to wait until your wedding." Over the following weeks, the Anderson estate was transformed into a hub of frenetic activity as the most anticipated wedding in Atlanta's social history was planned. But it was not a traditional high society wedding. It was a celebration that combined elegance with authenticity, a perfect reflection of the bride and groom. Abby insisted the ceremony be held in the mansion's backyard, under a canopy of lights she had designed and installed herself. Robert became the unofficial wedding coordinator, rediscovering an organizational streak he never knew he had, and Elena supervised every detail with the wisdom of someone who had been waiting for this moment for decades. The guest list was a fascinating mix of worlds that rarely met: hotel tycoons alongside electricians and technicians, Atlanta's high society mingling with workers from Cabbagetown. All the people who had been important in James's and Abby's lives gathered to celebrate a love that had surpassed all expectations. 3 days before the wedding, as Abby was making the final adjustments to the lighting system for the ceremony, James approached her with an expression that mixed nervousness and excitement. "Can I take you somewhere special?" he asked. "There's something I want to show you before we get married." Curious, Abby followed him to his car and they drove toward the hills north of Buckhead that offered a panoramic view of the entire city of Atlanta. When they reached their destination, Abby was speechless. On a hill overlooking the city stood the framework of what was clearly going to be a beautiful, modern building. A temporary sign explained everything. The Stephen Scott Technical Center, a school for specialized trades for women. "James," Abby whispered, "what is this?" "It's your wedding present," he replied, taking her hand. "But it's also so much more than that. It's the fulfillment of the dream your grandfather had for you." "I don't understand." "When Elena gave me the trust documents, there was a personal letter from your grandfather addressed to me. In it, he explained that if you and I fell in love and got married, a special fund was established to build a technical school that would bear his name." Abby's eyes filled with tears as they walked the grounds of the future school. "Your grandfather wanted to make sure that other young women had the same opportunities he gave you. He wanted to create a place where girls could learn specialized trades without facing the discrimination you faced. When does it open?" "In 6 months, and it has a very special founding director." "Who?" James smiled. "You, if you want the job." Abby turned to him, overwhelmed by the generosity of the gesture, but also by the perfect understanding it showed of who she was and what mattered to her. "James, this is perfect. Your grandfather also left specifications for the curriculum, designs for the labs, even recommendations for instructors. He had been planning this for years." As they watched the sunset over Atlanta from their future school, Abby realized that her story with James wasn't just about two people who had fallen in love. It was about the culmination of the dreams and plans of two older men who had loved their families so much that they had dedicated years to ensuring their future happiness. "Do you know what I love most about this?" Abby asked, leaning against James as they watched the city lights come on one by one. "What? That our love is going to help create opportunities for other women, that what we feel for each other will have a positive impact that goes beyond ourselves." James kissed her gently, savoring the wisdom and generosity of the woman he had chosen to share his life with. "Are you nervous about the wedding?" he asked. "No," Abby replied with absolute conviction. "For the first time in my life, I am completely certain that I am exactly where I am supposed to be." The wedding day arrived with a clear sky and a gentle breeze that seemed perfectly designed for the occasion. Abby got ready in the mansion's master suite, assisted by Mrs. Davis, Eleanor, and several friends she had made during the months of planning. Her dress was a masterpiece of simple elegance, white silk with subtle embroidery that upon closer inspection revealed patterns resembling electrical circuits. Her hair was gathered in a loose updo that allowed a few brown strands to frame her face, and she wore the emerald earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. "You're radiant, honey," Mrs. Davis murmured, adjusting the veil with expert hands. "Your grandfather would be so proud." "I feel like he's here," Abby replied, touching the small golden brooch that had belonged to Stephen, which she had discreetly pinned to her bouquet. As she descended the main staircase toward the garden where the ceremony would take place, Abby could see through the windows that the guests were already gathered under the canopy of lights she had created. The mix of people was exactly what she had imagined, elegant yet warm, formal yet authentic. Robert was waiting for her at the foot of the stairs, splendid in his tuxedo and with a smile that completely transformed his face. "Ready to give away your future sister-in-law?" Eleanor asked. "It's the greatest honor of my life," Robert replied, offering his arm to Abby. They had decided that Robert would walk her to the altar as a symbol of the new family unity they had created. It was a declaration that the secrets and resentments of the past had been replaced by love and mutual support. As they walked down the makeshift aisle toward the altar, Abby could see James waiting for her under an arch of flowers decorated with tiny lights that created a magical effect in the golden afternoon light. James wore a classic tuxedo, but Abby immediately noticed the detail that made her smile. His cufflinks were small golden lightning bolts, a private nod to the profession that had brought them together. When she finally reached his side, James took her hands and whispered, "You're so beautiful, I think you could light up the whole city with just your smile." The ceremony was officiated by a judge who had been a friend of the Anderson family for decades, but had agreed to include personal elements that made the ritual completely unique. "James and Abby," the judge began, "have chosen to write their own vows, and they have asked me to give them time to share the promises they have made to each other." James was the first to speak, his voice clear and strong, resonating throughout the garden. "Abby, when I met you, I thought you were just an electrician who had come to fix a problem in my house. I didn't know you had actually come to fix a problem in my heart." Soft laughter rippled through the guests. "You taught me that true strength doesn't come from having power over others, but from having the courage to be vulnerable with the right person. You taught me that true wealth isn't measured in money, but in the depth of the connections we create." James's voice broke slightly with emotion. "I promise to spend the rest of my life being worthy of the love you have given me. I promise to support your dreams with the same passion you have supported mine. And I promise that no matter what challenges we face, I will never let the light we have created together go out." When it was Abby's turn, she took a moment to look into the blue eyes that had come to mean home to her. "James," she began, her voice trembling with emotion, "my grandfather taught me that every electrical problem has a solution, but that sometimes you have to be patient and watch carefully to find it." She paused to wipe away a tear that had escaped. "I didn't know that when I came to your house that night, I was arriving at the solution to a problem I didn't even know I had. The problem of a life empty of real connection, of true love, of a partner who truly saw me." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "I promise to remain the independent and passionate woman you fell in love with, but I also promise to be open to growing and changing alongside you. I promise to work with you to build something beautiful, not just for us, but for all the people whose lives we can touch positively." Abby smiled through her tears. "And I promise that no matter how many years pass, I will continue to look at you as I do today, as the man who had the courage to see beyond appearances and find true love." When the judge declared them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was accompanied by the enthusiastic applause of everyone present and by the sound of the garden lights twinkling in a pattern Abby had specially programmed for that moment. The reception that followed was a celebration none of the guests would ever forget. There was music ranging from traditional jazz to contemporary pop, food that combined haute cuisine with southern classics, and speeches that alternated between humor and deep emotion. But the most memorable moment came when Elena stood to make the final toast of the evening. "My dear James and Abby," she began, her voice rich with decades of wisdom and love, "you have brought to a beautiful conclusion a story that began long before you were born, when two older men decided that true love was worth whatever effort was necessary to protect and nurture it." She raised her champagne flute to the couple. "Joaquin and Stephen have taught us that love is not just a feeling, it is an act of faith in the future. It is the belief that two people can create something together that is more beautiful and more powerful than anything they could create separately." The emotion in her voice intensified. "You have shown that when two people meet with open hearts and clear minds, they can overcome any obstacle, solve any problem, and create a life that honors both their individual love and their responsibility to the world around them." Elena smiled through her own tears. "May your marriage always be a source of light for you and for all who are fortunate enough to know you. May your love continue to grow and strengthen with each passing year. And may you never forget that you carry with you the blessings and dreams of two grandfathers who loved you enough to plan a beautiful future for you." As all the guests toasted and applauded, James and Abby looked into each other's eyes, knowing they had found not only romantic love, but also a shared purpose that would give meaning to every day of their lives together. 6 months later, in a much smaller but equally significant ceremony, James and Abby cut the inaugural ribbon for the Stephen Scott Technical Center. The school opened its doors with its first class of 30 young women from across the region, all eager to learn trades that would give them financial independence and professional pride. Abby, now Abby Anderson, divided her time between running the school and overseeing the electrical operations of the family company. James had discovered a natural talent for the administrative and financial aspects of the business, while Robert had become the team's creative visionary, developing new hotel concepts that combined luxury with sustainability. A year after the wedding, as Abby was checking the school's electrical systems on a quiet afternoon, James found her in one of the labs, teaching a group of students how to solder complex connections. "Excuse the interruption," he said with a smile, "but I need to borrow the director for a few minutes." The students laughed and made teasing jokes about bosses interrupting important work, but Abby could see in James's eyes that he had something special to share with her. He led her to the school's main office, where a surprise that left her speechless was waiting. On her desk was a large frame containing the first official photograph of the school, all the students and instructors smiling proudly in the main workshop, surrounded by the tools and equipment that represented their futures. But what truly moved her was the small brass plate at the bottom of the frame, in honor of Stephen Scott, who believed that every woman deserves the opportunity to light up the world with her unique talents. "When did you do this?" Abby asked, gently touching the plate. "I ordered it the day the first class graduated. I wanted you to have something to remind you how proud your grandfather would be of what you've built here." Abby turned to James, and he could see in her green eyes all the gratitude and love she felt, not only for him, but for the extraordinary life they had created together. "Do you know what the most beautiful part of all this is?" she asked. "What?" "That our love didn't just change us. It's changing the lives of all these young women, and through them it's going to change the world." James kissed her gently, savoring the wisdom and perspective of the woman he had chosen as his life partner. "Is there anything more beautiful than a love that creates light for others?" he murmured against her lips. "Yes," Abby replied with a smile that lit up the entire room. "A love that keeps growing every day, connecting hearts like wires carrying power to places that were once in darkness." As they held each other in the office of the school that had been born from their love, surrounded by the distant sound of students learning and growing, James and Abby knew they had found something more valuable than any inheritance or fortune. They had found the kind of love that not only completed them as individuals, but made them a positive force in the world. The kind of love their grandfathers had dreamed of for them, and that they were now passing on to a new generation of brave women who dared to dream of bright futures. And every night, when they turned off the school lights and headed home together, they knew that the next day they would turn on not only the lights of the building, but also the lights of hope in the hearts of everyone whose lives they touched. Because they had learned that true love isn't just about finding personal happiness, it's about using that happiness to create more light in a world that always needs more electricians of the heart. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful story of love, family secrets, and overcoming adversity. What did you think of James and Abby's ending? Were you moved to learn how their grandfathers had planned everything from the beginning? We love hearing from you, so tell us in the comments. What city are you reading from? What was your favorite part of the story? Would you like us to write more stories like this one? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like it, so we know you want more content like this. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next stories. Share with someone you think would enjoy this love story. Do you have an idea for a new story? Leave your suggestions in the comments. We love creating stories that connect with your heart and make you believe in the transformative power of true love. Until the next story, and may love always light your way.